I'm here with Brett. Brett, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for taking the time. Please reintroduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Ryan, thanks for having me back. Always love chatting with you. I'm Brett Copeland. I am Assistant Director of Strategic Communications in the UTSA Office of Academic Strategic Communications in the Division of Academic Affairs.
And you're back to talk about public relations specifically and get into some of the nuances and the strategies and the tactics that you've seen be successful in your career. Can we start with research? Can we talk a little bit about research for planning and campaigns?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a phrase that has helped me a lot throughout my career, didn't discover it until about halfway through, but looking back, I wish I'd had it, is this quote that is, do what you can with what you have where you are. And that has been a philosophy that has helped me a lot as I've moved through my public relations and advocacy career, because that's really where you start, right? In any kind of campaign, you always need to take a look at the landscape and figure out what you need to know before you can even go anywhere. And that's why research is so critical to building a solid foundation of a small campaign or a national one.
And research both on the client side, making sure you really deeply understand the client, and of course the audience side. Can you speak a little bit about some of the strategies and techniques you might use for both sides, both the client and your audience?
There are so many opportunities to learn about both your clients and your audience these days. There's like no excuse to not do a deep dive. With generative AI, those kinds of tools can help you rapidly recall information, learn more about who your client is, the tone that they speak in. Like, it's amazing what ChatGPT can do just from throwing in, old blogs or speeches from your client. You can really learn a lot about that through just asking ChatGPT to summarize it. And when it comes to your audience, knowing where they show up, whether it is online or in person, the things that push them to those spaces will help you better understand the action that you want them to take and how you're going to get them there.
When you say the things that push them to the spaces, what kind of things are you alluding to?
It could be a lot of different things. People are very complicated, so it is hard to nail down what motivates them to go do things. Is it the demographic background? Is it their economic background? Is it a problem that they're trying to solve that you can help them solve? There's a lot of different angles that you can look at your audiences and really figure out based on how and where they spend their money, where they spend their time online, that will give you a really comprehensive picture of who they are and where you fit into their story.
And we have people doing interviews, asking audience members what they want and how they might relate to a nonprofit, for example. We have people doing interviews with the nonprofit themselves and really making sure that they understand the client by doing deep dives on the website and talking to those potential clients. What are some of the strategies that you would suggest for making that time the most efficient? Because as you can imagine, we have very little time and it's often compressed when we're trying to do research. And research is one of the most important foundations for what comes next. But yet we sometimes shortchange it because it's so difficult to get the right questions in time for both your client and your audience.
And I think that's why research has to be ongoing in today's kind of media environment. Things are always moving and always changing. And if you are not constantly looking at new information, putting data in your back pocket, and constantly just examining who your audience is, then your message is already stale and is probably not going to resonate. People are constantly changing. And although you may not have time to do research in a crisis moment, you could have already collected Bureau of Labor Statistics data that is free and available for you to take a look at, or gone online and just looked at kind of historical purchase data. There's so many resources out there that can help you pivot quickly, but you got to have all that in your bank already. And when it comes to understanding your client, I understand CEOs and executive directors and subject matter experts, they have so much great information, but there's really no substitute for kind of walking out the doors of that nonprofit and going and talking to the people that nonprofit is serving. They're going to give you the clearest idea of whether that nonprofit's messaging and activities are effective, if it's relatable, and give you some real clues on where to go next.
And so once you've done the research to create amazing audience personas and crafted a situation to understand the client, and you've done a really good audience analysis, next you're looking at the strategies and tactics really creating a good plan for public relations success. What are some of the keys to a really good plan?
So I think that, a lot of times executives will get in a room and they will think, we are missing this critical tool. So until we have that thing, we can't move forward. In my career, I've found that there is always a way, do what you can with what you have, where you are. There's always a way to move forward and advance your message, regardless of the tools that you have. I am a big fan of just kind of going, some active testing out there, send up a trial balloon, throw out some social media and see how people respond to see if that research is actually, playing out in real life like you thought it would. That will help you further refine your message, figure out the platforms that are most effective in getting that message out, and give you some real life data that you can say, okay, my hypothesis was right. Let's expand this thing and get it moving. Or hold on, we need to take another look at the strategy before we go out and do the work.
Have you had some experiences where your data was wrong and you were like, oh no, we had this direction, that trial balloon gave us good data, and then all of a sudden it's not working out? Can you tell us a little bit about that kind of experience?
So I have some experience in political campaigns where the candidate maybe had an idea of what the problem was, but every time they went out and to give their stump speech, it just landed like a thud, right? So egos are a big part of managing client relationships. And unless you have a strong relationship with your client, you're never going to make an impact on your audience, their audience. So having the ability to sit down with a principal and say, the research said this, things are not turning out like we had hoped. We don't want to go and take another look, and get their feedback, because they're the ones who are going to be dealing with their clients, their audience, their constituents, and they're probably going to have some insight into what's happening in those rooms and what we can do to correct.
Have you had situations where you're trying to help prepare someone for that media interview or that speech? Can you maybe give us some insights into how to prep them for success so that they actually deliver those key messages the way that you had planned?
To successfully prepare your client to go on a media interview or advocate for an issue, you need to give them just the right amount of information. Not too much to where they lose those main messages, but enough to throw in interesting details, anecdotes, and remain loose and flexible on camera. And every client is different. Some clients are going to prefer the teleprompter. Some clients just want a list of bullet points. You need to understand where they're operating from, what is going to make them most effective, and then give them those tools and let them go do their thing. But if you give a client a wrong tool, you are going to watch it melt down or not be as successful as it could be. And it's just going to be a lot of work. So save yourself the time, know your principals, know what they need to do their work best, and provide it to them.
Can you give us some examples of some of those tools? Because I know you're working with subject matter experts, you're working clients, you're working with people who need to make an impact when they speak to the media, for example, or they're on camera. Can you think of specific tools that have helped them in the past?
One of my old clients, he was convinced that a teleprompter was the answer. In all the big TV shows, all the political leaders, they're doing the teleprompter, they're giving the big grand speeches. Total dud when he got in front of the camera, though. It was hard for him to keep track. He was so worried about his performance that he forgot what he was even saying. And the solution to that was, these are your words, right? These belong to you. So however they need to come out, as long as they hit our high points, like you being natural on camera and connecting with your audience in a way that is effective is more important than getting the exact phrase out on camera. It just, there will always be another media hit and another opportunity to get your message out. So as long as you are constantly moving forward in a way that is progressively better, that's okay. So find the tools that's right for your executive and make sure that they have them in advance, understand them, and feel confident when they step in front of that camera.
In practice sections, right? Do you offer practice sessions before that time and you're giving them live coaching to help them? Because I know that I've had so many people struggle with being natural and being themselves and embracing their own voice. They think that they need to perform often when in actuality, they just need to be themselves, right?
Absolutely. It's amazing. You see such a change in people when they step in front of a camera. It's like, that's not who you were just like 3 feet ago. before you walked behind it. So it's hard. You just got to recognize that people are people and they're not always comfortable. Even if they are like lovely and talkative in person, there's something about a camera lens and being on the record that is scary and intimidating. So as long as you recognize that and prepare in advance, it should be okay. My approach with prepping executives was, regular training sessions as I could get them. If I'm going to have a monthly meeting where I update my boss, maybe we'll review a few talking points. We'll kind of review best practices for being on camera, just to put it in the back of his head. When an assignment comes down, if I have 2 or 3 days, I'll have an initial meeting. What would you like to say? Here's kind of our big objectives for this interview. How are we going to get there and how would you like to prep? Day of interview, I'm going into that office, checking in with them in the morning, seeing if they need anything, if the data's clear. And then, as soon as that interview is about to begin, we're escorting the principal to the studio, we're sitting them down, doing one last run through, and then just letting them chill. Let them chill. They're about to go on camera, just let them collect themselves and see where it goes. But that advanced prep is really critical. It takes a lot of work off essentially last minute panic if you're just pulling your stuff together beforehand, before the interview actually starts.
Do you have any other advice for managing client relationships?
It's always about knowing your objective, whether it's a long-term objective or a short-term objective. And that sounds kind of, gross PR kind of thing. But that objective can be, I want my client to be able to tell their story to different audiences around the country. We want to raise X amount of dollars for this nonprofit that we're working for. We need X amount of votes to make this law happen. And those objectives can be applied to the personal level. I've noticed my boss rattles off and on for minutes and minutes and minutes when something could be said in one sentence. How am I going to work on that with that person? Or I really want to meet this journalist in this beat that I'm trying to break into. Where do they go? How can I run into them? What value can I provide to them on a regular basis? And taking really good notes, honestly. Everybody is different. Everybody has different needs, ways of working, things that they want to do on their own aspirations. So the better that you can understand those things and help fill a gap and help them achieve those things, you're going to have a bigger network of people to rely on when a crisis happens, when you need to make progress on an issue, or you're trying to close a deal. That network is invaluable.
Do you have any stories illustrating any of those things you just mentioned?
When I was helping a group of veterans get their policy nonprofit up and going, I realized that, hey, policy is not really that sexy of a fundraiser, right? This nonprofit was going to be difficult to help them grow their reputation, their budget, and their impact. So what I did was I looked at the resources I had, which was a network of journalists, policy experts, subject matter experts, healthcare providers, and said, okay, who is where doing what? I connected with an old colleague at an organization I had used to work at who was looking for a subject matter expert in a veterans healthcare issue. And through an agreement, a partnership I made with him, overnight, we grew our email contact list for, again, a nonprofit that had not existed the year before, who nobody had ever heard of. We grew our email list by about 30 in context of highly engaged experts, leaders, subject matter experts, and legislators on Capitol Hill in DC. That was knowing your network and knowing who held the keys and where things were living. But more than anything, it was knowing our objective. We didn't have a lot of time. We didn't have a lot of money. So how are we going to build our authority on veterans healthcare issues? And it was by leveraging the experts in the circle that, our circle that we have. So that was a big win for us. But it was only the first step. Again, do what you can with what you have where you are. So we had built our email list, and from there we needed to engage donors. We decided, we picked a few donors who had been friendly to us before, who were experts in or who had worked a lot in the veterans healthcare sphere. We took a look at what was motivating them in the coming year, and a lot of it was good journalism. So I went back to my journalist friend and said, hey, what can we do that will help them advance their mission while also help us connect with folks in some key committees on Capitol Hill? And it was come up with a congressional guide to veterans healthcare. It allowed us to show our expertise. It allowed us to go into congressional offices and meet staffers. It allowed us to demonstrate that we were advancing a potential donor's issue. And altogether, it helped us complete our own mission of getting our researchers and policy experts to testify before the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. That was a coup for us. from going from nothing and nobody to a high-profile congressional testimony from one of our experts. Our board was ecstatic. And thinking back, I think the only money I spent was paying an editor for the handbook. I designed it using Adobe tools, and then I made all the cold calls. So I think the only cost of that thing was paying an editor, me paying for the Adobe tools, and then my time and my salary. So as long as you understand kind of what is in your toolbox, who the right people are that you need to approach to accomplish your objective, you can do anything. There are really no limitations, especially with all of the tools available today.
I love how that story demonstrated PR for good, ethical PR to actually help our veterans. I heard a lot of alignment there. Can you speak to the importance of alignment between objectives, between audience, the client, the tactics, the strategies, the actual kinds of tools that you're employing? All of the things in that story align so well.
To be successful in public relations, you really need to have a strong handle on your network, the tools in your toolbox, and the amount of time that you have to complete your objective. Those things all together, it forces you to be light on your feet, to be able to pivot quickly, to think creatively, because the media environment today is moving so quickly. People are moving so quickly that there's so many opportunities out there to chase. Like, you could spin your wheels all day if you don't have a handle on those things: your objective, your network, and the available tools to you. So once you have all of those things, keeping them in alignment and aligning your messages and your activities is going to help you build momentum, build trust, and help you achieve your objective. When I was working at the Veterans Nonprofit, it was really about solving people's problems. It may not have been directly related to my job problem, but I knew if I helped that person solve their problem, they're going to help me get my email out to 30 contacts that we didn't have before, or meet with a congressional staffer who is in charge of, writing appropriations language for veterans healthcare. I don't have to know all the answers as a public relations practitioner. I just need to know where everything is so that I can connect my client or the person I'm trying to help with a subject matter expert or someone who can help. So I love public relations because it allows me to play in a lot of different spaces and meet a lot of interesting people. And what is so exciting about this to me is that a lot of times people love solving problems. So even though I don't know the answer, I know somebody who does. And if I give them that challenge and show them what it means to them and how it'll advance their objective, they're all in. I don't have to know anything. They're going to do that work for me. So really in PR, especially today, anything is possible all the time. You have the tools, as long as you've done your homework on your network and built relationships with them. There is nothing that you cannot accomplish, whether you have a giant budget or a small one. It just might take a little work and creativity.
So we've discussed a little bit about research, about planning, about alignment, about making sure that the implementation is aligned with all the objectives. What else do we need to know when it comes to the implementation? What are the things that are for implementation?
So after you implement, measuring results is key, because that's going to allow you to take the next step in whatever your campaign is. One of the major national campaigns that I worked on required us to get our message across on almost no budget, no advertising budget, except for in Washington, D.C. I appreciate the value of having a splashy ad in a big publication, but it's probably not going to change or put pressure on the points that I need to have pressure on them in order to complete the objective that I want. So instead of blowing our budget on a Washington Post one-pager, we decided to hold events across the country at different locations where we had high populations of members in dense urban areas. The amount of work that it took and weeks of planning, incredible. I had a very brilliant press secretary working for me on the time, and he was on the phone like morning to evening, calling communities across the country, talking about our issues. About a third of the way through, by talking to newspaper editors, local reporters in these smaller communities that bordered these larger metropolitan areas, he was able to say, hey, if we change this messaging just a little bit based on what I'm hearing on what is working on interesting people and coming and covering our events, I think we could really do more. If he hadn't have had those conversations, and if I did not place him in a leadership position on that project, we would have never known that. He was able to provide us real-time feedback that changed media strategy that allowed us to expand our reach and impact in those stories.
So the metric of real-time feedback led to direct success. Can you think of other evaluation metrics that have proven super useful to you like that in the past?
Social media provides such an incredible environment for message testing, right? You get both quantitative and qualitative feedback almost instantly. Measuring that over time, comparing it against what you know about demographic backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, and measuring all those things against your objective, incredible. I don't know about you, Ryan, but I remember that kind of feedback taking months to collect before the advent of social media. So the tools are there. It's how you collect that data, how often you look at it, that is going to make the big difference.
And that directly impacts how you might spend in the future. Can you talk a little bit about budgeting and PR and managing these national campaigns?
When I was running a large PR shop, managing the budget was really a big affair because it took so many different meetings to figure out the objectives of my clients just within the building, right? For me to effectively figure out where dollars needed to go, I needed to know what was happening in our organizing shop, what political affairs was looking for that year, what their objectives were, and being able to translate those needs into strategies and then assigning a dollar amount to it. There is nothing worse than coming up to a deadline, an election, and realizing that you don't have enough money left. So you need to be aware of where your resources are going, how fast that burn is going, and watch out for scope creep. Scope creep is what drains dollars in public relations campaigns.
Can you speak a little bit about the relationship with paid versus earned media? Because I know that you're also managing a paid side to your public relations efforts.
Yeah, so paid versus earned media. I loved earned media just because I like going and talking to people. And I think that there's a lot of authenticity in those communications, but paid media is still incredibly important. Paid media will allow you to break into new audiences that maybe you wouldn't have access to otherwise. Paid media will allow, your content to have premier spots rather than just trying to hope that people will see that little post on social media. And it's really a good way to provide an entryway for those new audiences to interact with your content. Social media is so incredible in the way that it serves folks things that they're interested in. And it would be a huge mistake to totally miss that as part of your campaign, the paid media part.
Can you speak a little bit about the returns on investment that have been the best, both on the paid side and on the earned media side? I can imagine that the time, the effort in your public relations journeys have yielded different results.
When I was a communications director for a large organization in Washington, D.C., it was really important for me to have my social media staffer with me during budget conversations. We really used sponsored content a lot in initially building our social channels. There were costs to that. With the algorithm at the time and how it was working, there were, of course, kind of costs to using sponsored content for a long time and eventually phasing that out. But we wanted to quickly build our social media channels, and that was really the fastest way to do it. But once those likes happen, those page follows occur, you have got to continuously serve them content that is going to keep them there and refer you to their users, right? So having a social media person that you trust, that is creative, that can identify opportunities and pivot to take advantage of those opportunities is really critical. And part of that is knowing when to strategically deploy sponsored content, or we never did the pay for followers thing. I don't like that. I understand that people do it to quickly staff up, but I think there's more authentic ways to do it. Anyway, but serving those folks content so that they share it, continue your message on, and help you build your following, all those ad dollars will go to waste if you don't have that kind of stuff in place.
You've given us excellent strategies for these national campaigns. Are there any things that applied at the national level that could be applied to a personal brand or someone trying to get their own name and their own efforts for employment or client relationships out there?
For someone who's looking to build their own personal brand, I really think that as a public relations practitioner, you need to remember that you are your own client too. You need to make the time. You need to gather resources and know what resources are available to you. Clearly know your objective and where you want to go, and continuously build and strengthen your network of people. There are a lot of incredible professionals out there who don't have all the answers. And as a public relations practitioner, I think the most exciting thing for me is getting to connect those folks together to solve a common problem.
That's such good advice, taking the time to interact and help people and provide value to people. But not only that, the connecting those experts and those community members in a way that leads to bigger outcomes that only the public relations professional might be able to see and execute on. I know you're also an expert in responding to breaking news and crisis communication. How do you approach responding to breaking news?
When it comes to responding to breaking news, it's really important that you do all the things that we've talked about. Knowing your network, what they're experts in, knowing your resources, where they are, and having that foundation built of knowing your objective and where you want to go. Because when breaking news happens, it happens quickly. And if you don't have all those things, it is going to be a lot harder to come up with them on the fly. When I was at my organization in DC and we would have breaking news, it was always such a bummer. It always seemed to happen on Fridays. That's take out the trash day, or at least it used to be in DC, when just something would come down that we'd have to respond to late on a Friday. It was dumped out that day. It probably wouldn't be big on Saturday or Sunday, but we needed to have something out there just in case it did blow up while we were out for the weekend. And because we knew that cadence, we began to prepare resources that would allow us to effectively respond in advance. But breaking news is not always as organized as Washington, D.C.'s Friday bad news deadlines, right? So you really just got to be light on your feet and rely on that network of experts that you've cultivated over time. They're going to be able to help you quickly respond to whatever is happening, because there's a good chance you are going to be so busy responding to media inquiries, dealing with principals who are likely freaking out in their executive offices upstairs. You're going to be dealing with reporters who are demanding answers, and that's not going to leave you a lot of time to look at strategy and come up with it on the fly. But if you have all the right pieces in place, you can turn that crisis into an opportunity.
Are there other nuances of crisis planning that we need to be aware of as we plan for the bad breaking news kinds of?
I think the biggest nuance about crisis communications is that nothing ever goes as planned. So you need to have a staff that is really clear on what their roles are. You need to be clear on what your role is as either a leader or a staffer, and you need to empower them to rock those roles when things go south. Taking care of your communication staff, or even yourself, having everything where you know where it is. I like to say, know where your keys and your wallet are, because when things are happening fast, you need to be able to access those resources quickly. People are demanding answers, and in the absence of you putting something out, there's a lot of people telling your story for you, right? So you need to be able to pivot and put something out, and the only way to do that is having everything in an accessible way beforehand.
Now, I understand you have a story about how you were able to use your public relations skills to help with a negative situation that happened personally to you. Can you speak a little bit about that experience?
When I was a communications director at my organization in DC, I was sexually harassed by a senior leader. I did all the things that you were supposed to do. You reported up, you talked to the people you're supposed to do, and I decided for me, I could no longer work at that organization as a result of that. But I loved the place. I didn't want to hurt it, and I was a little naive in believing that this was a one-time thing. It was a long time ago, before a lot of things happened. Once I'd left, I had been talking to my network, my contacts of journalists and ex-staffers and whatever, and word had gotten to me that what had happened to me was not that rare, unfortunately, and that it had happened even worse to a lot of individuals. And, I looked back at my network, saw kind of the folks around me, who was there to be able to support me through whatever I decided to do. Would there be a foundation for me to make an impact? I looked at my resources. I thought about the consequences of doing something, the cost of not doing something, and really had to think about what my objective was. But once that was clear to me, I had tools, I had contacts, I had advocates who were willing to step up and assist me. And once I had those things in place, I felt confident in being able to move forward and find other victims and try and work with them to have us go on the record. I found the reporter I was going to work with. They had reported on similar things at different organizations. They were well respected, and they were for a large media organization. So I had found my outlet, who I was going to break this news to. The last thing that we had to do was find someone who was going to go on the record and be at the top of the story, right? And having talked to several other people that experienced similar or worse things than me, where I was at in my life, I decided that I would be the on-the-record person to give confidence to these other folks to be able to come forward. Did that, and it was the most successful news story of my career, honestly. We were published in outlets across the world, and we were able to make internal change at the organization so that things like this did not happen again. It was not my first choice. I sure wish this would have been resolved in those conversations that I had with senior leaders at the beginning, but I was able to complete the objective of helping instigate a reform of the institution. Even though my name was the one on the record in that first story, it would not have been possible if I didn't have that network of people inside the organization, outside the organization, knowledge of how internal processes at an organization works, who's responsible for oversight in third-party organizations like Capitol Hill, and just the trust and support of a lot of people that I've known throughout my career. It would have been impossible. My moment of realization that this wasn't just me came because a reporter I had known for a couple years and had talked to, her and I were just chatting. We were chatting about something totally unrelated that kind of involved the organization, but not really. And she just randomly said, "Hey, I heard this weird thing when I was talking to one of your former colleagues. Had you heard anything about this? Are you familiar with this?" And it was I lost it on the phone. It was a shock to hear, again, naively, a shock that this had happened to someone else. And because of the relationship that I had with her, I was able to trust her in that moment because she's still a reporter. But I was able to trust her in a conversation where I was able to talk openly about that and try and connect the dots about what was happening. And eventually, she helped me find the right reporter. I had some ideas about where I wanted to go, but being a reporter, she had a deep network that really was invaluable to me and invaluable to the other people who had been hurt like that. So you never know where those relationships are going to go. You never know what little bit of info someone has in the back of their brain that maybe they think is insignificant, but can change the course of lives. Seriously.
For our audience, this happened before Me Too?
It did. I remember, sitting and watching those Supreme Court hearings and not understanding why I was getting so emotional about it, but recognizing kind of similar things that had happened to me. I'm so grateful for all of those folks who stepped up to support me, and just the bravery that they have to tell their own little bits of the story and their own experiences, is huge. And if all it took to do those things was for me to be the person on the record at the top of the article, things I wish my mother would never have to read, kind of stuff, that's a small price.
And the personal, true stories coming to bear on our real world, I think it demonstrates the power of telling your true story in a way that moves audiences and moves people to make good social change too.
And I think that you said it right there, right? Like telling your story strategically, knowing your objective, because if you don't know your objective, when all of that happened and I became fully aware, my objective was clear. How can you piece together, especially if you have limited time, resources, and network, how can you piece together a solution? And it's not going to be the perfect solution, but can it do enough to get you to the next day or the next campaign or whatever? There are no limits. Really, there are no limits when you employ the power of public relations effectively.
And being able to do such a great thing with your public relations skills, with the network that you had grown over so many years, I know that will inspire so many listeners to this story, because many of our listeners are just starting in public relations and they haven't built that network yet. They haven't put in those hours of hard work to understand how systems work, how media systems work. So thank you for bravely sharing that story of success and inspire our listeners.
I think public relations is such an interesting field, and I love it because it allows me to talk to so many different people, like really fascinating people who know a lot, who have seen a lot of different things, who have experienced things that I won't ever have the opportunity to. Public relations is such a necessary industry, and it's so exciting, especially now with all of the resources available to create really compelling messages in ways that resonate people across so many different platforms. So when I graduated college and walked across the commencement stage, Twitter had just come out a month previously. And now it's X, and we have, dozens or if not hundreds of other social platforms available. You get to play in so many tools and so many industries in public relations and take advantage of those things, because those experiences are so fulfilling. Being able to help people tell their story, I don't think there's a better job than that.
Couldn't agree more. And that's one of the things I love about podcasting too. I get to talk to amazing people like yourself. Can you give us a key takeaway from today's conversation? A parting thought, if you will.
Do what you can with what you have where you are. I really grates me when I get in a room full of communicators and they're like, we can't do something effectively because our website is terrible. Nobody goes to websites that much anymore. You got social media platforms that you can use. You've got Canva that you can create, essentially free branding. UTSA students have access to the most premier video editing, graphic design tools in the industry for free. Go use those things. Go experiment with them. Go create with them. Because not only is it helping you with the tactical skills, it is showing your future employers that, hey, this person can identify a problem and use creative thinking and problem-solving skills to finding a solution that gets them closer to whatever their objective is. And for a lot of folks, right now, it's going to be finding that first job, that personal branding. There are tools out there that will help you look polished, but are also going to help you continue to develop thinking about how messages are delivered, how audiences receive content, and how to be effective and how to have fun. Gosh, have fun in PR. Honestly, go have fun. This is the best profession. You get to do so much.
I get inspired by our student projects. I see them see problems as opportunities all the time. I'm like, wow, they came up with this idea and this solution for this client. And it's always so much fun to see that. And I know they're going to really appreciate the advice that you shared today. Brett, where can people find you online?
Follow me on LinkedIn. If you would like to connect with me, I'd love to connect with y'all on LinkedIn. Just find me, Brett W. Copeland.
Brett U. Copeland on LinkedIn and at UTSA. Brett, thank you again for joining us. We appreciate you, your deep insights, and your stories. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.